Eu gostaria de chamar aqui agora Dr. Jen Frahm. Dr. Jen Frahm está vindo aí da Austrália, região de Melbourne. Então, welcome. How are you, Dr. Jen? Your mix muted.
Very well, bom dia. It is lovely to be here.
Great. Dr. Jen, she's a specialist in organizational change, founder of Agile Change Leadership Institute that helps managers and executives leaders to achieve a new way of work, creating calm and resilient organizations so they can keep going on change, innovation, and transformation. Dr. Jen, welcome. And first of all, tell me why creating calm and resilient organizations, and then your stage is yours.
I think that's our greatest superpower in promoting agility is the ability to calm ourselves and our organizations, because with agility comes such relentless change, and that can do really uncomfortable things to our brains. So the faster we get control of our brains and to stay calm, the better we can make strategic decisions as leaders of our organizations.
Amazing, amazing. Welcome. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Tiago. It is a real joy to be with you here today. I am going to be speaking about the 5 shifts that leaders now need to make. Let me tell you a little bit about the Agile Change Institute. This is my business partner, Lena Ross, in the orange. As you can see in this photo, we preempted the social distancing. We were already standing over 1.5 meters apart. We formed the Agile Change Leadership Institute about 18 months ago when we recognized that there was this real gap in terms of support for leaders in how they lead change in agile environments. So really looking at what is the overlap between agility, change, and leadership. So within the Institute, we offer an online certification that we use microlearning as the approach to deliver that. We do workshops with leaders around called Leadership Disrupted. We both have published books in the last couple of years, and 2 months ago, we released the Agile Change Playbook, which is our first co-written book, and that offers 30 Agile change practices and tools for practitioners looking to do agile change in organizations. So as Tiago said, I am from Australia, and the part of Australia that I come from is in North Queensland, which is up at the top of Australia. That's the part of Australia that is very hot. It has crocodiles, it has snakes that will kill you in a minute, it has poisonous spiders, and I know that I am not selling that very well for you, but you will understand why I moved to Melbourne about 15 years ago for a little bit more of a comfortable experience. So Melbourne is a beautiful city. It has about 5 million people in it. And it's the only place in Australia where you have 4 seasons in one day. So it's a very interesting place to live. We have the honor of being the longest lockdown in the world, some 212 days of extreme restrictions during the pandemic. And it's for this reason that our city is preoccupied by the fact that we haven't been able to have our hair cut for 4 months. This covers all of our thinking, more so than anything in our business, is this concept of COVID hair. And it was only a week ago when I was musing, you know, who wore it better? Was it an aging rock star called Richard Marx? Was it a troll doll, or had my hair grown out so far? I'm very pleased to share that in the last week, or as of Sunday, the restrictions released, hairdressers were allowed to open, and it means that I can come a little bit more professionally coiffed for you at this point in time. So if we think about the pandemic, if we think about our current context, we need to acknowledge that it is both a disruptor and an accelerant. So we used to talk with leaders in organizations about the concept of a VUCA environment, right? So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we used to think that our world was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, my wordy, haven't we changed our view on that? If we have not had a masterclass in what volatile really is, it's been the last 7 to 8 months. So change was relentless in the before times, but it became brutally imposed in the during times. And it's not stopping. It continues with greater and extreme uncertainty in the after times as we emerge from crisis. I think what is really important to recognize, though, is that a lot of what we are seeing at the moment can be a really positive accelerant for us, particularly when it comes to advancing agility in organizations. Today I was at a Australian-Israeli Innovation Summit, and one of the speakers was the CEO of Optus, which is one of our large telecommunication organizations. And she shared the story of how prior to the pandemic hitting, they were experimenting with chatbots in their customer service lines, just in a couple of areas. Well, overnight, all of their call centers in international regions get shut down. They have no capability to speak with their customers, as all of their call center staff have to work or go home, where they don't have the facilities to work from home. So their solution was release the chatbots, release these chatbots that we are experimenting in one little area, and we release them across the whole organization, and we let machine learning do what it's meant to do. They had a fantastic response. They ended up working out that through bringing chatbots throughout the whole organization, allowing machine learning to work, they could pretty much effectively respond to 1 in 6 customer queries. And, so it was a great case study of how something they had been thinking about was really accelerated. The McKinsey study came out in this week, which told us that adoption of working from home, remote working, flexibility occurred 40 times faster than the time it had taken to adopt remote working prior to COVID. So in 9 days, the world adopted working from home, as opposed to the 11 months it was taking most companies before COVID. So, we really need to be mindful that there is the potential for this to be an incredible accelerant if we have the right mindset, which is what we're going to speak about. It does mean that we are facing into deeper uncertainty. And the intense dynamic of today's disruptive world means that we need to think differently. So we will talk a little bit about mindset. We need to work differently. We need to adopt new ways of working, be more collaborative, increase diversity in our organizations, more empowered and autonomous workforces. We have to learn differently. So learning agility becomes incredibly important. We're talking about micro-learning, just-in-time learning. How do we do bite-sized pieces that people can self-learn and self-teach with what they're doing in the workforce? We deliver change differently. We test and learn. We use human-centered design. We roll out small increments of change and we scale them up, which ultimately means that we have a very different way of leading in the organization today. It means that our superpowers as organizational leaders is this ability to embrace ambiguity. And this is part of the keeping calm. There's a beautiful quote in Nancy Martin's The Power of Pause. I'm not here to make you comfortable with change. I'm here to help you be comfortable with discomfort. So it's that ability to calm ourselves and calm our workforce so that we can sit with the discomfort of change that's coming through that will really create a strategic advantage for us when it comes to agility. So I spoke there about thinking differently. And we really like to look at an agile mindset. We think that it is really important that these shifts, these 5 shifts that leaders need to make, really start with how we think and our mindset. This image here is an illustration from my business partner's Lena Ross's book, Hacking for Agile Change, that one there. And I love it. I love it because it explains why we go so wrong with introducing Agile in organizations. Much of the training that we do when we're seeking to create more Agile organizations really focuses on the practices and the behaviors. It focuses on the doing Agile, what you do and deliver and how you act. And the reason why we get tripped up on that, why we're not always so successful, is that we actually have to focus on mindset first. We can't be successful with large-scale organizational agility if we are relying on old mindsets. So these are the shifts that we need to make to have a really agile organization. Lena defines the agile mindset as a capability, and I tend to see it as a strategic capability. It demonstrates the ability to recognize failures and challenges as opportunities for learning and improvement, along with resilience to evolve and adapt to meet changing requirements. So what are these 5 mindset shifts? Before I get into them, if you've got a piece of paper handy, could you pull that out and a pen or a pencil? Because I'm going to get you to do something as we go through this and just test where you think your mindset is. So just start by drawing 5 horizontal lines on that page. It doesn't have to be a big page, it can be a post-it note, but just draw 5 horizontal lines and the numbers 1 to 5. Okay, the first shift is that of an expert mindset to a beginner's mindset. Now, all of these mindset changes, shifts that we're going to talk about can be difficult, really difficult, because in the past we have privileged and we have rewarded and we have recruited for the old types of mindsets. And so when you grew up in your family unit, at school, in organizations, you were rewarded for expertise, for being really, really clever at what you do. To be better able to handle the disruptiveness of our environment now, we need a beginner's mindset because your assumptions and your experience are going to get in the way. If we are truly operating in unprecedented times, how can we hope to have experience and assumptions that will address those unprecedented times? We need to get as many ideas as possible. So we do this by applying a beginner's mindset to overcome that bias, questioning everything, suspending judgment, listening properly, asking how might we. If you have children in your family unit, you will know how well it is, how possible it is to come up with different opportunities. You know, you give a 4-year-old a fork and you ask them how many ways could they use that fork? What would that fork be for? By the time it takes you to think of 3 ways you would use the fork, they have probably rattled off about 20. So that imagination and what's possible in a beginner's mindset is so incredible. In Zen Buddhism, we call it Shoshin, the beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. One of the most easiest ways to move into a beginner's mindset is to use the work of Carol Dweck in The Growth Mindset. And this is a little tool that I use every day. It's the power of yet, 3 little letters. When we add the word yet to the end of our sentences, we find that we create opportunities to think about things in a different way. There's a real permissiveness. We get permission to try. I can't do this yet. This doesn't work yet. I don't know yet. That little word opens up amazing opportunities for us when it comes to thinking differently. And, you know, I think it can be a really lovely thing to do around your peers, to be able to help them, to coach them, to catch them saying things that shut down opportunities, and just add the term yet to that sentence. So the first line on your piece of paper, We have expert at one end, beginner at the other. Where would you put your mindset at the moment? You don't have to show it to anybody. This is just a little moment of self-reflection to think about the mindset shifts you might want to make. Our second shift is done is better than perfect. So letting go of perfection. One of the challenges with perfection is that it can often create paralysis. We stop what we're doing because it's just not good enough. And we know that if we stop what we're doing, we're not being agile and we're not responding to relentless change. The other thing is perfection is always subjective. There is rarely an objective measure of what is perfect because it depends on how you see perfection. When we shift our mindset to really privileging done, what we do is we invite feedback and collaboration from other people. Is this done yet? Right? So again, we're bringing yet back into the conversation. It aligns to the progress principle, which rewards small wins. So every time that we make progress because we've got another thing done, we get lovely brain chemistry, we get dopamine hits coming that actually create more resilience in our persons, but in our organizations. The focus on done also promotes a culture of experimenting, which inevitably leads to innovation. So let's look at our example before from the telecommunications company. The little experiment with the chatbot became a large-scale innovation. And it very much aligns in the world of Agile to minimum viable product. And what I like to do with leaders is really encourage them to use that concept beyond products. Think about minimum viable policies, minimum viable processes. Can we take that same concept and just make things able to be released and shared and get feedback? And that way we keep moving at speed. So your second horizontal line on your piece of paper, are you a perfectionist? Are you stopping things being released? I would suggest that the people who attend a conference like this, possibly not, but capture where you think you might be in a way to identify how far your shift is that you need to go through. Our third shift is the move from command and control to trust and transparency. And again, I often see command and control given a really bad name. We demonize people or leaders who use command and control. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that command and control served us well once. It worked best in highly predictable environments. Leaders were rewarded on their ability to command and control. So to get in a position now to say it's the wrong thing to do might be right, but may not be kind. And I think we need to think about that as we encourage leaders to make shifts. The interesting thing is when you talk to employees who are operating in a command and control environment, they will tell you that it feels like punishment to them. So they feel like they're always being punished. And I work a lot with leadership teams, right? So that they are the clients that I work with. And when you get them behind closed doors, they tell you that it exhausts them. They do not enjoy being a command and control type of leader. Ultimately, it disempowers people and reduces autonomy. And if we want to be effective at moving at speed in this disruptive environment, we need autonomy. High trust, clear accountability creates conditions for new ideas and new products and new services. So a little moment. Where are you on the command and control, trust and transparency? And here's a fun little exercise I get my CEOs to do. I get them to mark where they are on this line in terms of command and control, but then they have to share it with their leadership team and get their direct reports to mark where they think their boss is on command and control. There can often be a gap, and it's really worth exploring why there is a gap and what we can do to get across it. Our fourth shift is from failure aversion to failure seeking. And again, at the Innovation Summit today, the Australian Israeli Innovation Summit, a question was asked of the vice president, one of the vice presidents of Intel in Israel, around what is the secret source of Israel's innovation ecosystem, because they're amazing, they're incredible with what they do. And she said, quite simply, we are rewarded to fail. We have a culture of failure seeking. We fail fast, we learn fast. Failure equals success. It teaches us lessons, it shifts our perspective, and it gives us courage to experiment. One of the ways that I find that this topic, that leaders really struggle with it, is that they believe that we're asking them to fail in front of customers. And they say, but we can't fail in front of the customers. We will lose our customer base. We will lose revenue. We will lose confidence of the board. And that's not what we're talking about here. The shift that leaders need to make is to, how do I encourage failure seeking within my teams, within our organization, right? This is not a, it's okay to fail beyond on the outside of the organization. It's keeping it internal. There you go. To what extent are you currently trying to avoid failure? And to what extent are you seeking failure? Where would you put yourself on that continuum? So far, we have gone through 4 shifts, really critical mindset shifts that we need to enable before we have a hope of having an agile organization. From expert to beginner, from perfection to done, command and control, trust and transparency, failure aversion, failure seeking. And I have to say, and this is from personal experience in running these types of shifts, they are incredibly liberating. I no longer have to be right. I no longer have to be perfect. I don't have to know all the answers. I don't need clarity before I talk with my teams. I can let go of what no longer serves me. It is incredibly liberating and it is incredibly freeing. But I say this after about 7 or 8 years in working in agile environments. I wouldn't have said that 8 years ago. This is why I use the word shift very deliberately. This is not a massive change for people. Any shift to the right is going to leave you in a better position to lead an agile organization. Because ultimately, it takes courage and vulnerability. It can be really uncomfortable to make these shifts, to not be the expert all the time, to relinquish control, to produce something that's not quite perfect, to fail and learn and talk about it openly. It's really tough. This is difficult stuff. And this is why I think the 5th mindset shift that leaders need to make is the most important. It's the shift from self-judgment to self-compassion. For many leaders today, they will be doing things for the very first time. It's the first time I've had to run a company from my kitchen desk. It's the first time I've had to deal with family in the background while I'm, running a leadership team meeting. It's the first time that we've had to shift our supply chains to a completely different way of working. And when we do things for the first time, we are often very critical of ourselves. We go, I was not good enough. I should have done that better. What will people think of me? They won't like me anymore as a leader. And we often use really, really critical terms to describe ourselves. And when we sit in self-judgment, we sit in shame. And shame can be an emotion that really cripples agility in organizations. Because when we sit in a space of shame, what goes on for us is a flight, fight, freeze reaction in our brain. Shame creates paralysis because we don't know what we're going to do. We're embarrassed around the way we're doing it. It's not good enough. We won't do anything, which doesn't help us with agility. We can sometimes react in anger and conflict and we lash out at people. And sometimes we avoid issues completely when we sit in shame. And so the antidote to this is self-compassion. Back in the days when we used to jump on planes and we used to fly all over the place, they used to tell us that if the plane got into trouble, We were to give oxygen to ourselves before we gave it to the children beside us. It's the same concept. We have to give compassion to ourselves before we can hope to care for the people in our organizations as we're going through really disruptive times. And one of the questions I like to ask my leaders when I hear this really disruptive self-talk, would you talk to a friend or a loved one the way you speak to yourself? So, last line for you, self-judgment, self-compassion. I would put money on it that this is the one that most people are furthest to the left towards self-judgment. This will be the biggest shift that you have to make. And you're not alone. Let's revisit the story I told you at the beginning of this talk. A week ago, I'm comparing myself to a troll doll and an aging rocker. I perhaps need to do a little bit of work on self-compassion. So here are our 5 shifts: expert to beginner, perfection to done, command and control to trust and transparency, failure aversion to failure seeking, self-judgment to self-compassion. The way you lead and engage and support your teams is more important than ever before. My final words, be kind to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jen. Great, amazing. Thank you. By the way, thank you by translating a few sentences in your presentation. It was very kind of you. We have a few questions here. Let me find one. From Alex, to make these 5 mindset shifts, we need a system or a culture to enable this kind of thinking. How we can help the companies change in the same way?
Sorry, could you just repeat that question, Tiago?
Yeah, to make these 5 mindset shifts you mentioned, we need a system or a culture that enable this kind of thinking, right?
Yep.
So how can we help the company change in the same way?
Yeah. I really like the approach of empowering the leaders to lead their teams through it. Now, if as part of that mindset shift, particularly if we think about judgment to compassion, then one of the qualities in our leaders now is vulnerability, right? So vulnerability becomes being able to sit with discomfort, means that you sit with your leadership team and you say, these are the shifts we need to make collectively. And I think we can roll that out across the organization with the support of coaches in the organization, where we take this process of getting comfortable with discomfort, being okay with being vulnerable, and then encouraging our people to do the same with their people.
Great. You mentioned one of the big mistakes in change are the focus in practice, and I myself lead some changes, and sometimes when I'm trying to sell the mindset idea, executives are asking for a more visible things, like practice and KPIs and etc. How can we help them? How can we be able to help them to reconsider these more visible and palpable things to a more invisible like mindset? Mindset is something that you cannot measure sometimes, right?
Spot on. Tiago, that's such a good question, and it is really challenging. When a leader says to me they'd rather focus on something that is tangible and measurable, that speaks to me of avoiding something they're really uncomfortable with. So it's usually a diversion. And so that's the point where I have the conversation with the leader around what are they trying to avoid? Which of these mindset shifts have we just spoken about that is creating a really strong discomfort with them? Now, where you can meet them halfway is you say, okay, we're going to look at an experiment, a tool or a tactic or a metric that addresses one of those mindset shifts. So say, for instance, we want to look at perfection, done rather than perfect. What would a successful adoption of that mindset look like to you? And they will give you an arbitrary figure and you will go back and say, that's a bit exaggerated. But let's look at this as an experiment and say, okay, well, for you to be sold on the change to mindset, you need to see this level of uplift in productivity or product releases or services. And so I think you can meet them halfway and use that particular mindset and translate it into a business KPI OKR.
Okay, great. We have another question here. In this time of pandemic we are living, we are seeing a lot of teams regressing to selfish and individual attitudes. What's our tip for them?
We're seeing a lot of how did we describe them? Sorry, Tiago, can you repeat that question? I missed the bit that you said in the middle.
Yeah. This question is from Angelica. She's asking, in this time of COVID in isolation, social isolation, we are seeing teams regressing to their individual and selfish attitudes, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
How can we help them?
Yeah, look, and it is a really interesting thing. We are tribal by nature. Under threat, we will revert to people who are like us. That's safety, right? So if you're seeing teams that are reverting to selfish behaviors, that is a sign that they do not feel safe. Now, that safety could be psychological, it could be career protection, it could be physically, it could be health concerns, it could be the community they live in is not well supported, that they have family members who are not well. So that tells me straight away that that team collectively does not feel safe. So that's the conversation that I think you need to have with that team is let's talk about safety. What does it mean to feel safe? And then see if there's a way that you can bring that back into the organization.
Okay, great. Another question here is, how can I show this vulnerability you mentioned and not sound I'm being weak for my team? It's a question for a leader, from a leader.
Okay, so the question is, and show that I'm not being weak?
Yeah, showing this vulnerability you mentioned, how can I not, wow, I'm being weak. The team looking at me this way, wow, the leader is weak.
If you're the first to do it in the organization, it's going to be challenging, particularly if you have an organizational culture that sees vulnerability as a weakness. The place where I come from now is that vulnerability is a strength. And, I think one of the things, and particularly if you're familiar with the work of Brené Brown and who talks about vulnerability, you need to be really mindful around what are your boundaries. So if you are a leader who is concerned that you're going to look weak around being more vulnerable, my invitation to you is to do it in very little shifts, right? Don't do a big over disclosure. Don't do a big, sharing of everything that you are fearful of or you are concerned about. Think about the concept of shifts. Shift the dial. What would it mean to be 10% more vulnerable, not 50%? And what you do is you start to role model what it means to be a leader who is authentic and vulnerable and, is prepared to lean into discomfort. But start with 10%, not 50%.
Great. Dr. Jen, thank you. It was a an amazing pleasure having you here.
You're very welcome. It was a joy to be with you. Thank you so much.